Happy Cyber Thanksgiving and welcome to the Cyber Family Table. Here, have some cyber mashed potatoes, cyber gravy, and a heaping helping of your favorite CYBERTRUCK turkey. This is a really bad gag. Sorry, and welcome to the Android Police Podcast. It's Wednesday, November 27th. Welcome. I'm David Ruddick. Joining me is the little Liverpudlian. Yes, that is the demonym. I didn't know that was a word that could. He's longtime executive editor running Gear. It's Chris Davies.
Hi.
I didn't know.
I was laughing at the Cybertruck joke.
I didn't know actually that you appeared on podcasts. I wasn't aware you showed up on webcams.
I have to construct an elaborate face made out of old meats. So Thanksgiving week is perfect for this because obviously I've been trying to perfect my turkey recipe. So I use some of the leftover white meat for my face.
It's a convincing facsimile.
Thank you very much. Though people haven't seen me in real life.
So
you don't want to know where I put the beak. Anyway, sorry, David.
No, you will be apologizing the whole show, I'm sure. Just get them out.
So
sorry. Thank you for joining us, Chris. Honestly, I didn't think you would say yes, but
Is that why you asked?
We'll see where this train wreck leads us.
Well, normally the station.
Yes.
You can. Sorry.
This week, let's start with the Galaxy S11 because this is our first, I think, big, substantial, dripping hunk of news that we've had about this phone. And we've got just a whole pile of renders out there. And I mean, my first reaction was, well, it looks like a Samsung phone. I couldn't tell you much more.
I mean, progressively that the rectangle on the back of phones is just going to grow until it covers the whole back of a phone, and then we'll have so many cameras and more space for a battery. So I'm all for it. I've just decided I'm down with that.
Yeah, the camera module really is, especially in the S11 Plus. I don't understand why they've gone all Picasso on that one in particular. The other ones, it seems like lined up normally.
I think it's so that when you're taking photos of children and animals, they'll be distracted by the unusual arrangement of lenses and stare at the camera. That's literally the only reason I can think of.
I can't think of another good one either. So it looks like the S11 and S11 Plus both have like 5 imaging sensors on the back. So you have to figure out what all of those are, I guess. I'm not really sure.
I mean, I'm guessing there will be a very large resolution camera to take very large resolution photos of your loved ones, and then some sort of optical zoom so that you can take photos of your loved ones at a distance, and then a wide angle one in case you have a large family, and then maybe a macro one in case their skin is good and you want to get it really close to them, and then the last camera will probably be ultraviolet so that you can see what their expression actually is.
Yes, and for the ultra wide, I honestly thought you were going to say if you had a very horrifying family. I think it'd be good for that too. Max Weinbach in the chat points out that he believes that the reason the S11 Plus is all wonkadoo on the camera module is because of the 108 megapixel sensor on there, so they had to rearrange its face, basically.
That seems like a very reasonable explanation, and certainly more than ours, which is a bit disturbing. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. There is only so much that you can do with camera sensor sizes, and physics insists on having its way, as Wile E. Coyote discovered. So, yeah, I mean, now, of course, works for Samsung Mobile. So, yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense, Max. Thanks for derailing this with logic.
Yes, Max is the resident Samsung expert of the English-speaking internet, I think it's safe to say. So he says that you will have a 108 megapixel primary camera on the S11 Plus, a 10x telephoto, an ultra-wide, and a time-of-flight camera. So that is 4. I feel like there should be another one in there, and the ultra-wide. Or excuse me, no. Maybe okay, there should be another one in there. There are 5. But I guess it's fair to say that Samsung is finally, going back to a focus on cameras, which I feel like they've kind of missed out on the last couple of years a little bit. Would you think that's fair to say?
I think so. I mean, I think they were doing very well for a while, and then they kind of coasted slightly. But I think that it's interesting that we've gone back to let's throw lots and lots of different sensors on it rather than let's do computational things, which kind of feels like that's been this year's excitement. You know, who can do the most interesting computational stuff, who can make my photos look better by putting a dedicated AI chip on. I love the look of sort of scorn and dismay on your face. It's
I'm just
my
thinking about the
favorite
way
part.
I'm thinking about the way Samsung's cameras make things look, and that's what's leading to the scorn and dismay. They do have a
You mean,
particular
well,
brand.
they do, and it's bright and bold, and yeah, I mean, and some people I'm sure love that. They're kind of, you know,
It's basically the opposite of me as a person, which is why I think I find it so revolting.
yes.
I shouldn't
Well,
say revolting. They're okay.
yeah, wow. Because you're delightful, so I guess the opposite would be revolting. Yeah, I mean, it gives my skin tone like an actual warmth to it, which is kind of nice. Makes it look like I haven't just been dug up from somewhere. So yeah, I mean, there must be people who like it, at least within Samsung. Otherwise, I guess they wouldn't do it. But
Yeah, so what I've heard about this, and I think we've talked about this on the show before, is I was at Google's launch for the Pixel 4 and was talking with some people with some of Google's camera team, and what they were saying was that these manufacturers, Samsung, Huawei, other manufacturers like LG, manufacturers predominantly from Asia, tend to make their cameras a certain way in terms of how the photos are processed because people in their home markets expect the photos to come out in that way. It's what they want. Whereas when they look at how, say, a Google Pixel or an iPhone does it, they're like, no, that's it's too harsh. It's a little too unforgiving. And it doesn't really pop and feel like super contrasty the way that everybody in these apps, like on social media in our countries, are modifying their photos to look more like. So that's why we changed our cameras to put out photos that just look that way as soon as you take them.
do you think that that has some connection to I feel like beauty modes are more
Yes.
prevalent in those markets, whereas here maybe they are less prevalent, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
the Google camera finally does have one. I think
Yes.
they added it last year, but it's it's a thing that's obviously growing in the US. So it seems like maybe we'll kind of converge on a happy middle ground. I think like the live filters and like the most phones now like take care of most of that.
Yes. There, I feel like maybe everyone else has been using them and I've been left out, and that's why I look terrible in photos with people, and everyone else looks beautiful. Maybe that.
Yeah, I don't know that I can never imagine being the kind of person who likes the way they look in a photo. I'm horrified by every picture of me.
Yes. Well, I'm being polite, David, today, so I'm not going to go any further down that line. But yeah, no, that's. I think you are right that that there is a certain type of person who loves seeing photos of themselves or hearing themselves on podcasts, for instance. So yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I want to talk about before we move on, honestly, guys, it's going to be a slow news day on the podcast, and we had Chris on to talk about things that you may totally tune out of, but I don't care because I want to talk about them. But before we end the conversation on the S11, Chris, do you think like there's any kind of I look at the design and I'm like, well, that looks like every Samsung phone in the last 3 years. Do you think that hurts them or helps them? Do you think it's the brand recognition outweighs the kind of very extremely iterative design language?
I feel like that they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in a sense, because the front of the phone now is just screen. The back is predominantly camera and otherwise flat glass, because that's what you need for wireless charging. I feel like there is a limit to what they can do. And so maybe it makes more sense for them to tap into something which is at least vaguely recognizable for people who would recognize a Samsung out in the wild, because otherwise, what's it going to look like?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, their design language is just so samey that I personally like. I cannot. It's gotten to the iPhone level where I cannot be sure which Samsung phone I'm looking at unless I get really close to it. And honestly,
Yes.
sometimes I have to think: is that the S6 or the S7? I can't remember what makes them different. They've been so slow to stagger that design language forward, but I guess there's also the fact that most people put their phones in cases, so you never see what it looks like anyway.
This is true. I don't use cases. I don't believe in cases. But
Is
yeah,
it like a
no,
philosophical, like a religious life belief?
It is, yes. I also don't wear shoes. I refuse to wear a hat when it's raining. And in fact, the only sleeves that I wear are those Lycra sleeves that you pull up when you are driving, so that when you have your elbow on the window, they don't get suntanned on your head. Yeah.
A man of many, many beliefs. So now we're going to do a shameless segue into what we are here to talk about. The My Hyundai app, and this will be a very short segue, I promise, because the My Hyundai app is one of the least interesting things we could possibly talk about. Just got a major redesign, which I'm sure everybody at Hyundai, including Rob Sky, are very excited about. But the Android app also now supports Pixel 4 Face Unlock. Rob, friend of the show, even though he probably doesn't listen to it. So we're seeing a lot of these apps with vehicles now that allow you to do a lot of the remote stuff. I feel like Hyundai was pretty early to the game for this.
They were.
Especially like being a budget brand. Like this was a fairly big deal for them when Blue Link rolled out. So it now works with the Pixel 4 Face Unlock. So I think that's where we're going to segue. And I want to, maybe talk a little bit about like smartphones and cars, and then eventually just cars, because that will keep my attention better. So Chris, like surveying the landscape of cars, obviously I think Tesla's app is probably the most powerful one right now. I think
so. Yeah. They definitely have invested, obviously, in that sort of digital first. I'm sorry, I just said digital first. That was amazing. Completely derailed myself. Wow. Anyway, yeah, they've definitely invested in that digital first. I don't even have anything after that.
You're not even wearing a dress shirt. I don't think you're allowed to say digital first. And I've said it now
tie
too.
somewhere that I can just clip onto my earlobe. No, I think they put a lot of money into it. Their drivers are very tech savvy, and they expect that kind of thing from their phones. But I think it's definitely something we have seen other automakers weighing into more, and I think even more importantly, doing it in a way that doesn't demand like an extra monthly subscription or something for that.
Yeah, that's the thing with a lot of these I've seen. I know Mercedes-Benz for a while had. Do they still have the subscription over at Mercedes? Like I know their app.
So there is Mercedes Me, which does have different subscription components to it. Some of the things, so for instance, usually you can unlock the car, check the status of the windows, whether it's locked, maybe remote start, that kind of thing from the app. And then if you want some of the more advanced stuff, then typically you have to pay for that.
Yeah. So one of the more exciting ones I think I've seen so far, I haven't driven, any of Polestar's vehicles yet, but it looks like the Polestar 2 is going to have a fairly impressive one. They seem to be targeting Tesla pretty directly with their experience, and it will be free, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I think this is partly because the whole Android Automotive infotainment system, which I know you've played with. I don't know what you feel about that. I was kind of impressed by that. I think
I think it seems like next to Tesla, the most advanced implementation we've seen. I think Tesla still wins for slickness. There's no denying that the look of their interface is there's a clear focused vision there. They want it to look a very particular way. I think with what we've seen based on Android Automotive so far is a more generic, very modular kind of looking platform. I feel like it's not super slick, not saying it has to be. And in the world of car infotainment UIs, like it's still light years ahead of so many of them right now. But
yes.
So what brands do we know of being on board so far? I know we've got, Volvo and Polestar, obviously.
Polestar. Audi, I think, has committed to using Android Automotive, and I think interestingly, I don't know how much of the LA Auto Show news that you saw from last week, but one of the features that they've just announced for their app is the ability to sort of temporarily enable some of the using the app temporarily enable some of the features in the car, whether that's a more advanced adaptive cruise or whatever, different things, and either do that paying it like a subscription ongoing, or if you just want it for a month, you can just turn it on through the app. It's kind of an interesting, not something I necessarily expected from Audi, to be honest with you.
Microtransactions, but for cars. Oh,
yeah, I think I think they would probably rather think about it as a way to upsell you after you've left the dealership.
Yeah.
But yeah, just that, and I think that's really interesting, because there are times when maybe you want something like Cadillac Super Cruise. If you're doing a long journey and you don't want to have your hands on the steering wheel, but do you want to pay the upfront cost for that and have it all the time when you're not necessarily going to use it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that gets into the topic of, where a lot of automakers are going, which is cars as a service, which I think is
Mhm.
definitely like the biggest shift we're seeing in the business right now. Do you feel like that's kind of the inevitable direction, or do you think that's kind of something that it's just an experiment?
I mean, I think that there are always going to be people who need to own or feel they need to own a car, whether that's because of where they live or because they like a particular vehicle or they have 6 children or something foolishly. But but I think that there's also a big cohort of people who live in cities, maybe, or who live in multiple places, split their time between different cities, different locations, who maybe want the flexibility of having a choice of different vehicles or having a vehicle sometimes, but not having to think about where am I going to park it most of the time. And so I think, yeah, there are plenty of interesting models. I don't think it's ever going to necessarily replace the kind of the traditional purchase or lease plan, but I think some of the car subscription services that we've seen are very interesting.
Yeah, and because I'm contractually obligated to bring it back to phones occasionally, I think this does mirror a little bit of what we see with smartphones. Apple's had a lot of success, I think, with the iPhone upgrade program, and T-Mobile and others have had similar programs. Where
Mm-hmm.
essentially you don't ever really own the phone in a meaningful sense. You just kind of trade it back in when you want a new one, which is, I think, similar to leasing, but phones are more service oriented to begin with. So it's kind of a fascinating parallel to see, I think, the auto industry probably drawing upon some of these ideas they've seen come from technology more than, were already part of the existing automotive business.
Absolutely, and I think what's kind of particularly interesting is that they're not no two automakers are kind of doing it the same way. So you've got some of the more luxury brands like Porsche and I think Cadillac had a scheme for a while where you could basically you pay a monthly subscription and then you get to choose from a long list of different models. And if you want to change that every week, you can change that every week. And someone wearing white gloves comes and takes away your old dirty car and brings you a brand new one. And then you have someone like Volvo, which is doing some Care by Volvo, which is kind of more of a traditional phone sort of upgrade plan, very much like that iPhone program you were talking about, where you sign up, you say you want this particular car, you pay a single monthly fee, which includes the car and the servicing and everything apart from gas, basically. And then after 12 months, if you want a different car, you can hand that one back and get a different one, or it's like a 2-year agreement. And I think that's really, it's interesting. But at the same time, not everyone wants that. So the Polestar 1 is just about to start production and shipping midway through next year. The plan for that was going to be that it would be a subscription only scheme. And then they heard the feedback. People they wanted to own it. They didn't want to give it back. So they're now not doing that as subscription. It's just going to be are you going to buy an $155,000 ex-Volvo concept hybrid?
Yeah, I really want to drive that. JP it tried to tell me I would be able to drive it, so I'm like fingers crossed over here for a loaner once everybody else is done with them, because it seems very exciting.
It's a really interesting car. I mean, I do think electrification is the future, but I think that the future doesn't kind of arrive in one big lump. It kind of trickles in like you've wet yourself on a plane. And so I think that, the idea of a performance hybrid that has maybe some of the better qualities of an electric car, and then also the sort of the reassurance when it comes to things like range of a gas engine. I think there's a lot of scope there to kind of taper that out as we move into our bold electric Elon Musk future.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of gets to the broader discussion, So again, I'm forced to bring it back to smartphones. Smartphones were like this crazy transformative moment for personal technology. I've said this on the show multiple times before, that really, like, I think to me, like smartphones, that moment when smartphones went mainstream, that was like the Model T. That was just totally changed the way everybody did everything and the way they interacted with technology and the parts of their lives they were able to take with them everywhere. It really, I can't imagine living without a smartphone anymore. And I think that's true of the vast majority of people now. Living without a smartphone would be difficult and annoying, and in many ways, it would also be healthier, but none of us would ever want to go back.
I don't know. I mean, I hear what you say about the health side. I don't know. I feel like there is such a thing as too much of something, absolutely. But I feel like the upsides of what we can access through a smartphone and what we have with us and what you can do with it, I feel like that, with temperance and great responsibility, I feel like the benefits outweigh the costs there.
Yeah, full disclosure, I just felt like I needed to give that argument some oxygen. I don't actually believe it.
I know, I know, I
I
know. You've
just
never believed anything you've said in public, so
no,
that's
never, not a single word
no.
of it. But I feel like this is, we're actually approaching, we already had one of those moments with personal transportation with cars.
Mm.
I feel like we are slow. Cars move slowly. I mean, not in the actual literal sense, but
No, well,
in
some of them
the
do. Yeah,
some of them do move
at the
slowly.
park at times. Yeah, it's
But I think that we're like coming up on this moment where we're going to watch. There's basically going to be a tipping point, and
mhm.
it seems like we're getting there like quicker than I think most people would have expected initially. Tesla's really been kind of the engine behind that transformation. I don't think there's anybody that would argue, even if they are pro Tesla, anti Tesla, or apathetic Tesla,
Mm.
that Tesla has been the single biggest transformative force in the industry in terms of like how every other automaker is responding to
Yeah.
electrification, to changes in vehicle design, infotainment, technology in general. And so, obviously Tesla had its big unveil this past week, and you were there, right?
I was not physically there. No, I
Ah,
was. I know. I'd sadly missed out on the fire and the Blade Runner theme and um, hearing the glass shatter. Yeah.
that would be the best part, hearing the glass shatter. That was quite a moment, which has been talked to death on the internet, but it still
Yeah.
seemed perfect for Elon Musk. It seemed like truly the thing that should happen to him once.
And I think I can't remember who I saw tweet about it, but someone was saying, well, actually, it's Elon Musk stood in front of a massively armored looking pickup truck with smashed windows, sort of says it all about the future. That this is
Yes.
the vehicle to hustle your children into, and then be hermetically sealed inside and hope that the have-nots will not be able to batter their way through because they haven't hit the door with a hammer first before doing the window test.
Yes, you have to do window test first.
Always window test first.
So if I were to draw a parallel to phones, I mean, the Motorola Razr is a form factor exploration. I talked about
Mm-hmm.
this with Michael Fisher on the show last week, I guess. And, we talked about like why people would want this, what would be polarizing about it, what would be the drawbacks. And obviously the Cybertruck is actually a pretty good analog for that, because there is so much about it that immediately screams, there are a lot of reasons you shouldn't want to touch this thing with a 10-foot pole. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, there has been such a dramatic response from the other side, who seem to be embracing the contrarianism of this vehicle. I would say this is a contrarian vehicle.
It is very much, you either love it or you really, really don't love it. And I mean, I must admit, I think the styling is really, it's definitely eye catching. I think that the video of the sort of the tug of war with the F-150. I think less interesting was the kind of whoever won the tug of war, whatever reasons there might be behind that in terms of physics. But I think more interesting was just that difference in styles.
Yeah.
It looks like they just rendered the right half of the screen where the truck is, and the F-150 is such a familiar sight because it looks like so many trucks on the road because Ford obviously sells a absolute metric shit ton of them. So, I mean, there are lots of them on the road. It's very hard to imagine a Tesla Cybertruck sort of just pulling past you.
Yeah, and I know I'm personally on the side of the fence that believes the Cybertruck will not quite look as it does right now.
Oh, absolutely not. No, I mean, it's there are so many things about it which are not at all production ready. Whether that's it doesn't have side mirrors, and US regulations say that at the moment you must have a glass side mirror, which is what's holding up Audi and others who would like to put cameras on the side instead. I cannot imagine that it gets to the market without bumpers of some sort. I would not
Yes.
want to be the pedestrian who is responsible for testing the pedestrian safety. Crumple zones of incredibly strong stainless steel. There are parts of a car which are supposed to break, when you crash because the car is sacrificial and you and the nuns you have inside are not. So yeah, I mean, I'm very, we've seen a concept, and lots of people have put down $100 that they could get back to help fund production of the Model Y, and yeah, I mean, I'm very much looking forward to seeing side by side how that turns out, because no, it will not look exactly like what we have seen.
No, almost certainly not. Granted, that won't stop Dbrand from selling skins for it already.
Yeah, then good for them. I mean, it's
I think that speaks, that's kind of speaks to, the expectations that concepts can set for people. And I feel like obviously there are people out there right now who look at this truck and have decided that, oh no, this is what it's going to look like. There is a lot of
Hmm.
confusion about that because Tesla was not open about the fact that it is a concept. I mean, anybody who works in the industry knows, looking at that's obviously a concept vehicle, doesn't meet lighting standards, visibility standards. Like, they could never sell it in Europe because like that thing has more sharp edges than like a pile of knives. But
Yes.
it's there are so many things about it that would have to change. But I feel like a huge part of the internet has latched on to the very specific aesthetic Elon Musk, who, I think it's fair to say, Elon Musk is the person behind much of this design. It
Oh,
feels very
absolutely.
personal to him.
Yeah, everything I have heard from people, talking, whether that's within Tesla or kind of people who know people, whatever. This is what Elon wanted the truck to look like, and go away, make this happen. And I think it's interesting because in previous year, when we've seen previous Tesla cars, there has been just as much sort of Elon Musk fanfare, for the Model Y, for the Model 3, Model X. But all of those cars that kind of, as we saw them for the first time, were fairly close to what the production car ended up looking like. And
Yeah.
I think in a sense, Tesla has set us up to expect that they don't really do prototypes or concept cars so much as they just kind of say, look, we have made this incredible thing and you will want it because it is electric. And I wonder whether that has played some role there in people thinking, oh, hang on, I'm going to get this
I think you're right
incredible
about
wedge.
that. I think you're absolutely right about that. That Tesla has set that expectation. But Tesla's designs have also, I wouldn't say Tesla's cars are ugly, but they are very generic in a way. The lines are very simple.
Hmm.
There are lots of, very gentle swoops, nothing too dramatic or edgy. I think they play a lot with Tesla plays with shape, I think, more
Hmm.
than a lot of automakers do. You get the sense that a Tesla could be shrunken down to like something the size of of a toy, and you could feel the shape of that car in your hand in a way that would feel like a polished rock almost. They're very smooth cars because of the low coefficient of drag they've gone for oftentimes.
Absolutely, yeah. And there are some things that make a lot of sense if you're making an electric car in particular, which is that you want it to be slippery through the air. Yeah. One of the things that surprises me kind of about the Model 3 is how I always think it looks better in chunks rather than
Yes.
as a whole. If you catch sight of one kind of between other cars in traffic and you just see like the side mirror brace, I think that bracket is really quite beautiful in a sense. And there's some parts of it which are quite elegant. There are some angles on it which are very sweeping and flowing. And then when you put it all together, it's like, oh, okay,
Yeah,
that might not have been.
yeah, it feels like, actually, if we're going to go up on a tangent about this, when I look at the Model 3, I always see two different cars. There's the rear quarter view, which I think is
Mhm.
great. There's the front quarter view, which I think is, well, I not as much of a fan, playing to aerodynamics more on the front, I feel like, than the back. I
Yes.
feel like they have actually a pretty unique look in the rear of that car. In the front, it is kind of a blob, unfortunately.
Do you think that he went extreme with the Cybertruck because some of the feedback to the Model Y was that it was just a slightly inflated Model 3?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like this, probably the Cybertruck design, has been sketched on a napkin for some years now. I don't know that it's a response to the Model Y, which admittedly has been quite harsh. I don't think it's
I
that ugly.
I don't know how long I would say that design has actually been finalized, but uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I don't think the Model Y is ugly, but I think it is very clear what it is related to,
Yes,
more so
definitely.
than when you went from S to X, for
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah, which I called the Model X when it came out, the machine that births Model S's. It's like the mother whale, essentially.
Right. Yes.
It does look like it just opens up and a Model S comes out of the back of it.
Yeah.
Um, so when we talk about concepts, this is
Mm.
something that we used to see more with smartphones. We used to see
Yes.
companies bring us, like new ideas that were a little crazy and a little on the edge. And going back to the Razor, I feel like that was actually one where we did get a little bit of a preview. It was 3 years ago,
Mhm.
3.5 years ago now, when the first Moto Z dropped.
Right. This is
Yes,
true.
so
Yeah.
so in San
Oh wow. Yeah.
Francisco, Lenovo had that event, and you could go to this little Lenovo R&D talk that they had
Mhm.
there, and they had, the head of their R&D operation showing off like three different foldable prototypes they had. And one of them was a tablet, one of them was a tablet phone, so it folded out to a tablet, folded
Mhm.
up to become a phone. They were all functional. They
Mhm.
all looked kind of janky, but they worked. They
Yeah.
were fun, they were real. And so I feel like what we ended up with, the irony, with the Razor, which I think it's fair to say has received substantially more praise for its design than the Galaxy Fold has.
Mhm.
We ended up going very backwards with that. I don't think at the time, many people were convinced the direction where foldables were going to go was toward this admittedly quite retro design language, which I think is
Right.
is pretty interesting.
I mean, I compared to of the two, I would much rather have a Razor form factor than a Fold form factor. I think the idea of having a big screen on a smartphone is something that people are used to now, and I would not like to give up. But I also feel like carrying a big screen device is annoying sometimes, and that's
Yes,
so, and I think that would be more annoying if I wore women's clothes and had no pockets and had to carry a bag around with me. I think that would be
absolutely.
incredibly annoying. And so the idea of having something which is, I've never really felt like, oh, I need something about the size of an iPad mini to carry around with me, and I'll just fold it up into a chunky phone that goes into my pocket. But I have thought, God, this phone is big. Am I just going to hold it, or am I going to put it in my pocket with my car keys? Or yeah, that's kind of where I fall on that spectrum. But I know that other people feel differently.
There are a diversity of opinions out there on it, I will say. I think that the Motorola version, for the reasons you cite, has much more of a mainstream appeal. I think it's much
Mhm.
easier to sell people that idea and say,
Yeah.
well, your phone is huge and it doesn't fit anywhere and you're constantly dropping it. Well, what if we just made it so it folds up? And so when you do drop it, it basically has a case on it already, and you
Mhm.
don't have to worry about scratching it up, which all of us do. If you keep your phone, excuse me, if you keep your gene in your phone, if you keep your phone in your jeans, that little change pocket rivet hits it every time you pull the phone
Yes.
out.
Mm.
It's just the worst. So I did
It's
find
the
it.
price we pay for keeping a dime on us all the time.
Yes, it is. I find it curious that this radical form factor update for phones, the direction that seems to be most practical so far is one we've already explored. I'm not sure where I was taking that in larger discussion about design and concept cars, but I think that the Razor is
Maybe
like the first thing
maybe
we've.
the angle was that um, no, I'm sure there was the angle was that sometimes the more extreme concepts that we see aren't as valid in the long term, perhaps, as some of the maybe more mainstream ones, which actually turn out to be deceptive in their simplicity.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That
And
actually
I couldn't say it
probably.
again. I don't know what I said. So.
Yeah. So I think that, well, let's talk about the future of phones. So I talked about this with Michael Fisher last week in regard to the Razor, and we are of differing points of view on this in terms of what the future holds. To me, as much as I see some of the small drawbacks of the big flat screen that a foldable like
Mhm.
the Razor solves, I also see the compromises that the design introduces, especially for the time being, because plastic and all of that kind of stuff, just general reliability, how you have to design something with folding, moving components and
Mhm.
everything. Even if all of that were solved, I still feel like probably these phones will remain expensive,
Mhm.
and at least considerably more expensive than our regular old bricks. And that, to me, on the conceptual level, there's nothing that seems totally broken about the brick that needs to be revolutionized. Or am I just not being forward thinking enough?
I think you're being very realistic, which is important. And I think you're right that this is not going to be a mainstream form factor anytime soon, if at all. But I mean, I feel like if you go back to the first few generations of Galaxy Note and that size of screen, and then you go back kind of before that and look at something like the Dell Streak, which I can still remember just
Oh,
being
yes. Oh, that phone was so
astonished by the size of that
phone.
screen. Yeah,
Yes.
I know. And it was like, it was back in when the first iPad was coming out, and it was this kind of like, well, what is it? Well, is it a phone? Is it a tablet? What is this the future? And in a way, it kind of did turn out to be the future because, big screens have become ubiquitous now. I don't know. I feel like that we have reached a kind of a limit at the moment where in screen size where you can't go that much bigger because whilst
It's like wheels.
yes, absolutely, because practically then you start to lose things in return for that benefit of having more screen real estate. And I feel like that there are always going to be people who want a bigger screen. And so a foldable device will cater to those people. But I don't think, I agree with you that I don't think this is going to be the future of phones.
Yeah,
For
so
many
I
reasons.
drew an analogy when talking about this with Michael last week it was a car analogy, so I think it works. And I asked him, do you think in the future, because smartphones, we've reached saturation, the market's massive, there are just,
Mhm.
so many handsets shipped every year, and manufacturers are struggling more and more to differentiate, they're becoming more and more expensive. But there's clearly a market of people who are willing to pay an obscene amount of money for a phone. People are buying the iPhone 11 Pro Max.
Mhm.
I'm sure it's selling very well. So clearly, and whether or not that's for reasons that are practical as much as well, it's a new iPhone and I must have the new iPhone.
Mhm.
But I think the way I looked at the Razor was to say, if phones like this will cost $1,200, $1,500 for the foreseeable future or more,
Mhm.
but it becomes a little easier to produce them. They become more reliable. Most of the kind of basic limitations behind them dissolve into the background where it's like, well, you aren't giving up much. You just have to pay for it. Do you feel like there could be a category of essentially like I would call them the sports cars of phones, these exotic devices where you can support a business, it can act as a halo product for
Mhm.
the rest of your portfolio, and maybe they don't make a ton of money, but that's what gets people in the door. It's what people associate the brand with versus trying to make something like the Razor mainstream.
Yeah, I would like to think that there would be a room always for something exciting and different, even if no one should buy a first generation Motorola Razor. That
No.
just seems like a given. And probably no one should buy a second generation one. But I'm very glad that there are people out there who are buying them and who have that kind of disposable income to spend on something which is partly useful and partly just for the love of the tech. And I think the sports car analogy is a good one, that there are always going to be people who there's going to be always a mass audience of people who need something reliable and who go down and buy a Chevy Malibu. I don't know. Oh no, I said reliable. Anyway,
Oh,
who go and buy a Toyota Camry, which is, a very solid, great car, does everything you would want it to, but probably isn't going to get your heart rate going. It isn't going to be something that you'd be like, oh, you must come outside to the parking garage and see my Toyota Camry, which is a shame, maybe, but, more Camry fetishists. But I feel
Camry
like,
fetishes. That's
oh,
a
yeah,
community I want to get into.
it's a niche within a niche. But yeah, I think yeah, there is always going to be in cars this kind of group of people who want to have something which very few other people have, and I think that's part of the appeal. And I think ironically, if foldables became mainstream, there would be a group of people who'd be like, oh well, I don't want mainstream anymore. I want whatever is next. Um, so there's always going to be like this cohort of people who are willing to pay more for something that very few other people have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wonder, now that we've watched the market for smartphones really mature, what
Mhm.
part of the appeal of, upgrading your smartphone has been that in the last decade, there have been some pretty substantial improvements that have come along.
Yeah.
A lot of them are iterative, but if you go back to an iPhone 4 even and compare the camera and the battery life and what the screen looks like and all of that, you'd be like, oh, this is actually garbage. You know,
Yes.
cars
But
move at
we
a
thought it was great. Yeah.
Yes, we did. We did. I mean, the design was revolutionary. It was like
Hmm.
totally, it's like no other phone had looked before, which was cool. But with cars, the product cycle is so slow. And also the car itself has honestly changed very little in the last probably 25, 30 years. I feel like,
Hmm.
especially, we've started to slow down outside of like the very exotic stuff where, some exciting things are happening. But
Hmm.
for, regular ordinary cars, things haven't changed. And so as the smartphone like really stabilizes and just basically becomes a commodity,
Hmm.
I do wonder if we'll eventually see more investment by companies into these Halo style products in a way where they probably wouldn't have justified it before, because it would be too risky. It would be too much of a diversion of business resources. Whereas today, well, you can say, if Samsung wants to make the Galaxy S11, do we need to put all, how many of our engineering resources realistically do we need to put into this device? To make sure that it's competitive with everything else that comes out next year, and how much do we have left over for the really radical ideas, the things where we're spending a lot of money, we're probably not making much, and we're taking risks. And I think that we haven't, the phone hasn't become mature enough yet to do that. I think we're just on the cusp of that, perhaps.
I think there's something there about, you can either take a risk because you want to make something that is outlandish or new for its own sake, or you can see it as well, let's rinse those very early adopters to get them to foot the bill for developments that are going to filter down. And I think actually the car industry is a good example of that. You look at someone like Bugatti, for instance, owned by VW Group, very few people are going to go out and buy a $3.5 million Bugatti Chiron, sadly, a lovely car. But, some of the things that that Bugatti has done and developed there and has been able to afford to do, and that they are very upfront about, that they can do it only because they have these incredibly well-heeled customers. Those things do gradually filter on down through the whether it's a engine timing stuff or different systems for how the turbochargers are managed or that kind of thing. Things filter down from those incredibly expensive cars into, over time, the Audis and the Porsches and the VWs and the Skodas and the Seats and whatever that are within the group. So I do kind of wonder whether part of the issue is that we don't have any of these big phone groups. For instance, I guess the closest you'd get maybe would be something like Huawei and Honor, where you have different tiers of provider. That there isn't really this kind of, there is no Bugatti of phone brands that is part of an overall group, really, that can then filter down technology without diluting what that Bugatti is doing.
And obviously it's always been a race to the bottom in electronics. So you have to put the most with the least, and that's always been the model. But I do wonder, we've seen that happen a little bit with gaming PCs. Gaming PCs have once again become quite expensive if you really want to go all out. We do see companies like Intel and AMD binning out products that are clearly all margin at the very top of their portfolios to people who are willing to pay. And it's just about a willingness to pay. It's not about the practical, benefit of the product necessarily. It's like, I want to have the biggest, fastest thing.
Yes. And no one needs to go 0 to 60 in 2.4 seconds as opposed to 2.6 seconds. But being able to say to someone, mine will do 2.4 seconds, is that there is a certain type of person, and I think, not an unusual type of person, who enjoys that kind of, there's a boastful kind of bragging rights thing about it, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reality that keeps that market alive, which I am very much in favor of.
Yes.
I will always be in favor of the wang waving that keeps a sports car alive. I think that's a reality we must live with.
Yes,
if we are to have nice things.
And we like nice things. And
we do.
So wave those wangs. Yeah.
Quote Chris Davies, wave those wangs.
Yeah, there are worse quotes out there that
I know, but it's a good one for this show. I think we've met the bar. I forget where I wanted to go after this. The wang waving has totally thrown me off here. Oh, what was it? Now I'm totally blanking. I had a thing and now I've lost it. Was it about foldables? I don't think so. Jules can take this out in post because I'm really just trying to. Oh, it was something about cars, but now I don't remember what it was. Oh, I was going to pull it back in, and now I've lost my segue. The horrors of running a live show.
It's going so well.
It was going just so
Everyone's
well.
going to ask for their money back. It's awful.
I know. And we definitely didn't predict any kind of awkward moments during this. So I guess I'll go to the I'll roll to the one that I predicted. I can also roll to an ad. Let me roll to an ad real quick. That's a good idea. And Jules, please just cut all this out. We can make a segue. Let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, ourselves. The Android Police podcast is live on Twitch 4 times a week. You can catch us on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays doing a podcast. On Tuesdays, we have the Q&A show with Cody and or Corbin. We can't do it all without your support. And the best way to do that, supporting us, that is by subscribing to Android Police on Twitch. We are live Monday, Wednesday, Friday around noon Pacific with various guests like Chris, or just recapping the news depending on the week. And that's twitch.tv/Android Police. You can subscribe to our channel for free. If you have Amazon Prime, you get 1 free Twitch Prime subscription per month. If you're an Amazon Prime subscriber, you do benefit us more if you renew that subscription every month. It expires. There's unfortunately no way to make it continuously pick us, but if you keep upping that subscription every month, it's a big help to us, and you can take some money out of Jeff Bezos' pocket and put it into ours, which I'm personally in favor of. You can also get a special emoji of Ryan if you're a subscriber, the Ryan emoji, and you can also get extra entries into our many giveaways that we run on the site. If you want to be a paid subscriber, tiers start at $5 a month. And so twitch.tv/Android Police. And if you don't use Twitch and just want to give us a shout out, you can email us at podcast@androidpolice.com. If you want to give us a donation, say thanks for doing the show or doing Android Police, androidpolice.com, and you can hit the donate button up there. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll get back to the show. So I think I'm just going to have to dive fully into cars for the last quarter of this show here, because it's the... I know you're horrified. It's
I can't stand cars. Damn you, cars with your wheels and fascias.
Just the worst. So were you at the Mach-E launch at the LA Auto Show?
I was. Yes. Yes,
What
I was.
What do you think?
I think that it makes a lot of sense for Ford. I think that whilst Mustang purists are very angry about it being called a Mustang, I think it makes perfect sense for them. I think as a recognizable brand, it's something that is very easy to tap into, and I think it's also unfortunately one of those cars that looks much better in person than it looks in pictures, because I know that you have been very reticent to state your opinion
yes.
on the
I
aesthetics of the new Mustang Mach-E. Yeah,
I've been very quiet about that.
Mm-hmm.
I do have to say that even if it does look better in person, the wheel arches are criminal. I don't know how those made it in. They're very strange.
They are very strange. Yes,
it's an odd decision, but I think as a car for Ford, that this is definitely the most important vehicle they've introduced, probably since the Explorer. I think that's fair to say.
Or even before that. I think it's a car they definitely needed to do, and they needed to commit to it, and they needed to give it every possible opportunity to kind of latch on and catch hold, which calling it a Mustang is part of that.
So do you think that Ford's long-term strategy, if you look at Mustang sales over the last 8 to 10 years, basically since the recession, Mustang sales bounced back for a little bit, but they've been on a steady decline for the last 4 years or so. And, Ford with the latest generation of Mustang, honestly, aside from the switch to IR independent rear suspension, the car fundamentally did not appeal to a new group of buyers. It didn't try to up the technology very much. It was still it's just an engine and a set of wheels, let's be honest, and attached to a brand. It's the brand, it's the engine, it's the everything Mustang stands for. And I do wonder, do you feel like that the audience for that kind of car is shrinking?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. And I think that Ford recognizes that too. There are plans for a hybrid Mustang, which will be, like an actual coupe rather than like this SUV form factor that will, so far all they've said is kind of power of a V8, but with, more like a V6 sort of sized engine at most. So we don't know exactly what it's going to be like, but I think that they recognize that the audience out there for that sort of traditional coupe or convertible is shrinking, is dying. That there are fewer people interested in that. So I feel like
I think that you're saying, I think my take on it has been that you, with the younger generation of buyers, are seeing people that look at cars first as a practical conveyance and second as a lifestyle choice, where, earlier generations, often that was flipped because everybody could buy a new car. They were all pretty affordable. And so your car was much more about making a statement. Whereas today, a lot of people are trying to get by without cars if they don't have to have one. And if they do, they kind of want the the one car family, I would guess, is on the rise. I don't know if I've seen any statistics about that, but do you know anything to support that?
I think that there is definitely an expectation that people will be able to do more with that one vehicle and the compromises will be less. And I think electrification plays into that nicely because, there are packaging benefits to stop no longer having a big fuel tank and a big gas or diesel engine at the front and being able to just kind of push those electric motors out to the ends and put your batteries underneath and just having a much bigger, more flexible cabin. I think that there are definitely still people who have that sort of old school style of looking at it a lifestyle first. I think what's maybe changed has been the lifestyle has changed, and that the cars that they now identify with are not those kind of big displacement, traditional pony car, muscle car kind of things that they want. People who are following the cutting edge trends maybe are looking for something which is electric or which has a kind of a more modern sort of spin on it. And that's why I think I think the Mustang is seen perhaps as being a little bit old fashioned and fuddy duddy. And so the people who are going out with a lifestyle first kind of attitude, it doesn't resonate with them.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think that's probably for me when I look at we both live in California, so we do have a skewed view of it, but we've rapidly seen basically Tesla take over as the image car for the state. Like without a doubt, everybody's aspirational vehicle, if you have one, if you are a, typical non-car enthusiast person, it's a Tesla. Like I just don't think there are many exceptions to that rule. Los Angeles is a bit of a strange car market. There are some people there who still attach, a lot of sentiment and value to certain luxury brands, but I think the general population has really shifted to Tesla as, this is what you want to own one day. It's the car that, says you feel like you've made it, which is what, a lot of the traditional cars like Mustang, Camaro, Corvette used to stand for in a lot of ways, at least the higher trims. So I think that's been a shift that probably caught. Do you feel like that? I mean, I would say it caught the big three off guard.
Absolutely. And I think that part of it, I don't know when you were last inside a Mustang or a Camaro for that matter, or any of these kind of
fairly recently.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, but
yes,
it's because one of the things that stood out to me when I saw the Mach-E was that the cabin is just leagues ahead in terms of design and fit and finish and the technology and just the quality of it. You get into a Mustang and the plastics are cheap, things are brittle and hard. There's very much this sense that they focused the spending on a big engine, and the performance side of it, and maybe the styling side of it, and everything else is kind of the corners were cut because, like you said, in the olden days, that these cars were very affordable, and to do that they had to make sacrifices somewhere. And I think that kind of attitude of, well, the speed and the performance and the sound is the most important thing has carried on, and it means that you get into one now and it's like, oh god,
Oh yes, yeah. Ford's interiors are probably my least favorite of any current automaker. They're also very claustrophobic for whatever reason. I don't like sitting in their cars very much. They're
and
quite
so one
tight.
of the things that Ford specifically talked about when we looked at the Mustang Mach-E was that they have chosen a palette of unusual for them kind of colors. It's bright, it's lighter, it's brighter. It feels more airy inside, and I think that if anything is going to sway a lot more people because you get into it and you don't feel like you're just sinking into this bucket of parts bin black plastic.
Yes.
There are things that you don't mind touching and don't recoil from them in horror.
Yeah, and if I were to once again draw my contractually obligated analogy to phones, I would say that
phones, yeah.
if we're on the cusp of the smartphone, I feel like a lot of cars right now, a lot of especially from American automakers, feel like late era BlackBerry and Palm, where it's like all of the things that these companies are doing are acceptable because no one has emerged to offer them a real challenge and say, you can look at this problem completely differently and offer a totally different solution, which is in a way what Apple did. You can argue nuances about it, but Apple really said, well, what if we just got rid of all this legacy stuff that you think is necessary, that you think needs to be here, and throw it all out the window, and it's just a screen now. And I think that's actually really what Tesla did. They're like, all these buttons and switches, they need to go. Just put it all on a screen. I mean, the Apple and Tesla analogy, I think, works fairly well there in terms of their approach.
It does, but I think where it maybe starts to kind of fall short is that for so long, Tesla and Elon Musk have been saying that they want the rest of the industry to catch up, and that they are so keen and excited about this idea of the rest of the car world catching up and releasing electric cars and moving away from internal combustion. And I think they do want that, but I think that they end up then forcing themselves into more and more extreme positions where you get vehicles like the Cybertruck, because I think that when you are a small player,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden other people come along and things like sufficient range and performance and quality and the charging infrastructure, which is slowly starting to get there, we're starting to see when the low hanging fruit is kind of picked off, then you have to go for more kind of extravagant shouty things, which I don't think Apple has necessarily had to do. Whereas I feel like with Tesla, we've kind of seen with the Cybertruck particularly this sort of, oh god, we need to kind of crank up the showmanship, we need to bring out a concept car. And because all of the things that we were doing that no one else was doing, and and we were pointing at them saying, why aren't they doing this? Now they're kind of starting to do it.
I mean, I don't know. I guess you could say it's kind of Tesla's trash can Mac moment, but it's. I think I agree. The analogy does break down when really truly explored, but I think it's also, like you said, it's a function of cars moving more slowly. Things take a long time. It takes a long time to be responsive. And I think with smartphones, what we saw was Apple, as a brand became highly associated with this is how you do it. And I do think Tesla still has that pretty commandingly so far. They've defined the conversation, which I think is the biggest thing you can do in any product segment. You can say, you can basically set the blueprint. And I think that, with certain cars, like some automakers like Ford, obviously with Mach-E, has gone all in on Tesla's approach. They've said, all right, this is what's selling. Like, we should sell what sells. That's an obvious approach. Whereas you have another brand like Porsche, which is saying, no, we are going to take what we do and we're going to apply it to this larger electric concept. Have you driven the Taycan yet?
I haven't. I was supposed to, and then I couldn't make it. I was very annoyed. But I think the interesting thing there is that maybe Porsche can do that because they are part of Volkswagen Group. And so they can do that because Volkswagen is going to churn out however many tens, hundreds of thousands of ID3s and ID4s and whatever. And there are going to be like a vast number of basic regular electric cars from Volkswagen Group across its various brands, and Porsche will be able to kind of cherry pick the best of those components. I think the car industry does move very slowly, but once you get up to speed with these kind of platformed architectures, like whether that's VW's or some other companies, it means that they can very quickly sort of say, well, okay, we're going to make the hatchback, and then we're also going to use the same platform. We'll extend it slightly. We'll use that extra length to put some more batteries in. So we're going to make an SUV, and then we kind of make a different size crossover because we can just shrink that down. All of a sudden, they have, while it took them a while to get up to speed. Once they're there, the scaling, I think, is a lot easier for them than what Tesla will experience.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I did remember what I wanted to talk about, and I think it's a good little bit to end the show on because it's actually related to our subject matter in some kind of way. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm sure everybody wants to keep talking about cars endlessly, but we are going to talk about cars just in a more mobile related sense. So one of the things that we hear, Blas, you and I both go to a lot of events put on by the likes of Qualcomm, carriers, and basically everybody, let's say the larger 5G space, which makes me feel icky to say, but it's true. So Qualcomm and all of these other companies, carriers especially, talk a huge game about like V2V and V2C and 5G and enabling, vehicle to vehicle communication and all of these sorts of things. And I feel like I just hear crickets from automakers on most of this stuff. There seems to be very little interest in discussing like, product development plans and where this technology stands with them. And we see all these technology companies acting like, oh, you're going to see this stuff in the next few years. I don't know if I buy that. What's your take on how 5G will relate to cars?
I think the V2V stuff and the kind of the vehicle to infrastructure stuff is really interesting. But like you say, we haven't really seen a huge amount of actual movement of that in terms of commercializing it. There's been a few different, you can buy a particular, I think the Cadillac CTS has V2V, which allows Cadillacs to talk to each other. I think it's that interoperability thing which has struggled. And of course, the fact that 5G is nowhere near ubiquitous enough to, it's great if if you're in a car and suddenly you drive out of coverage, then you lose your V2V or you lose your vehicle to infrastructure. What I would say is that we're starting to see it now kind of being included in or on the roadmap for more popular cars. So like the new Volkswagen Golf, for instance, dragging it back to cars again, the new Golf is going to have V2V as standard. And if you look at the number of those cars that they sell every year, it's hundreds of thousands across Europe. And this is kind of like all of a sudden you get to this tipping point where it just takes someone saying, well, we're going to make it default. We're going to make it standard, just like we saw with 4G LTE in cars and Wi-Fi hotspots, and the manufacturers saying, well, look, we're going to put it in. Some people will activate it, some people won't. We can maybe use that LTE backbone to kind of deliver some things. We can do something with it, and the number of people activating it and paying us every month will kind of balance it out for the people who don't. I think 5G I agree with you that we hear a lot of great talk from the carriers and from the chip makers, and none of them really have a particularly, because they're all at the mercy of the people actually building those chips into the products. And until the car companies decide that this is something that is worth them doing and people will pay for, they're not going to do it.
And I think the for me, looking at how cars develop, I live in an area where I see Waymo vehicles. I saw a Waymo I-Pace the other day. It's the first one I've seen. But seeing these cars, obviously, and learning about, like, I'm sure you've heard about, like, some of the new next gen LiDAR systems that are going to be a lot less expensive now.
Yes.
Because they won't require rotating basically anymore. So, as if you know anything about cars, LiDAR, I think LiDAR sensors can cost upwards of $10,000-$15,000 a piece, something ludicrous like that.
Even more, yeah.
Insanely expensive. And so there's been a huge, tremendous effort by some startups to really, really scale down that cost. And it sounds like some of them are succeeding now. And so to me, it's kind of the same tension you have with smartphones and 5G when it comes to, like, on-device computing power and AI and all the various sensors and new kinds of chips we're putting in, and cars, where we are getting to the point, and obviously Tesla has proven to a reasonable extent, you can put enough stuff in a car locally that it can do a lot of the operations that we're expecting 5G to help enable. And so I do think there's some tension there where you have, an approach of, like, we're going to jam the car full of sensors, and that's going to be our approach. We're not going to worry about all of this vehicle infrastructure nonsense or complying with these standards. When we can just say 100% for sure, under every condition, connection or not, your car is, going to be able to respond and behave the way you want it to, versus the other side, where I think, obviously, I think if Volkswagen is in the V2V, that makes sense because they're in mass market economy cars, where they're saying a modem's a lot cheaper. If we can just send and receive data, that's a lot less of an investment for us. But, you wonder, like, well, are economies of scale just going to make it such that not putting the sensors in the car just becomes foolish?
Well, funnily enough, so Ford the Mustang Mach-E will launch with just a regular adaptive cruise control. But down the line, one thing they're planning to do is a kind of a Tesla style, autopilot style hands-off system, though, which will use an attention monitoring sensor on the steering column. You'll be able to it'll keep to the lane. They're going to use some high precision GPS mapping like we've seen from Super Cruise. And they're building the sensors in from the start. So most trims of the car, they haven't said exactly which yet, but they will have things like the ultrasonic sensors and the cameras and things, but they'll also have LiDAR. And so they wouldn't confirm exactly how many LiDAR sensors there are going to be.
Interesting.
But I mean, like you say, this is very unusual for kind of a production car for them to be including any LiDAR sensors, just because up until very recently, it was just prohibitively expensive. It was not something, it was prohibitively expensive, and also they weren't really, a spinning sensor that sticks out of the bodywork of the car or is on the top of the car like a top hat. Aesthetically, it doesn't work. They get damaged easily.
A LiDAR sensor does look legitimately silly.
It does. And so these kind of solid state sensors that can be fed in, that a lot of companies, that either the smaller companies or the bigger companies, the tier one kind of suppliers like Bosch and people like that have been working on, that can just be hidden behind the bodywork, and don't need to have kind of big cutout windows and things. I think we're starting to see now the point where where Ford plans to just include that on all of the kind of the eligible models, and at some point there will be a firmware update and they get enabled. I mean, that seems like kind of a game changer in a way.
Yeah, it does.
this is something that, other manufacturers, mentioning no names, have said, is financially infeasible and isn't really required for their systems. And so to see it kind of one of the mainstream big three automakers saying, no, look, we're going to use LiDAR in some sense, I think is really interesting.
And at some point, obviously, you're going to, probably have a situation where Waymo, who I think it's, fair to say are the leaders on self-driving, proven in a like live environment.
Yes.
Waymo gets lots of deserved criticism for certain things, but I think in terms of actual product and showing it off, nobody's had more guts in terms of like saying, just get her in the car and ride and see what happens. They've done that now, and it works. And I know that Uber has already, basically said is in some recent business filings and statements on the record, like, we're probably going to have to license Google's technology. That's the way it's going to have to be if we want self-driving taxis. And I'm sure car makers, like I know Fiat Chrysler is already showing a strong interest in Google's technology too. So at some point, you have to imagine that Google, Waymo will just have basically, here a list of specifications. Here's what your car needs to have. And we can license you this package where they just become a Bosch, basically.
Yeah.
And,
And I think maybe people coming looking at it from the smartphone side and the phone side of things that maybe don't really understand how modularized some of the technology is that, that automakers are using, and that Tesla is quite unusual for doing a lot of it in-house. And even then, it uses sensors from other people. There are, if you have an adaptive cruise control system in your car, or a lane keeping assistance, or blind spot monitoring, that is often just bought from a tier one supplier like Bosch or someone like that, and just dropped wholesale into the car. And a lot of it is just kind of sort of stitched together like some unwrinkly Frankenstein's monster. So I think, there is entirely the possibility of someone like Waymo being like, well, we're not going to make our own cars, because why would we do that? The economics of that are terrible. The margins on building cars are pretty bad.
Yeah.
So why don't we just be a supplier for a thing that increasingly all cars are going to need to have?
Yeah, I think that's, kind of the future that makes a lot of sense given where the state of the market is. And Tesla's obviously never going to share anything they have. They have no interest in doing that. And why would they, honestly,
No, I think it doesn't need to be. Yeah, they don't need that. It's an exclusive thing that they have and that they can count on to differentiate themselves. I wouldn't share it if I were them.
Yeah. Okay. We've already run a little long this week, so I would like to thank you, Chris, for joining us for this riveting conversation.
Thank you for having me and not making me talk about phones constantly.
Yeah, talking about phones constantly does make me sad. And it probably makes our listeners sad to hear about cars, but I promise we'll get back to phones on Friday. We'll have David Immel on the show. And
he knows about phones. Yes, he knows.
He does know about phones, and he knows nothing about cars, I promise. I'm pretty sure this topic David does not know less about than cars.
I wouldn't go that far. He can drive, though, which is always a shock.
Really?
Yeah, no, he can. Yeah.
That's shocking, actually.
I know. You heard it here maybe first.
Well, all topics we've talked about today can be found at androidpolice.com/podcast. We're live 4 times a week at twitch.tv/androidpolice, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the podcast around noon Pacific. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. Please don't send an email complaining that we talk too much about cars. Podcast@androidpolice.com. If that's your complaint, just at me at RDRV3 on Twitter, please. Chris, where can people find you?
People can find me hiding in all good bushes. And on Twitter, it's C_Davies or at /gear.
Thank you very much for joining us once again. And we'll be coming at you Friday with another show, like I said, with David Immel. Until then, eat up, be safe, stay tuned, and take care, everybody.